Hi YouTube, welcome to a new series. I'm going to call this the Teachtime series. And our first episode is going to be on the 6 Bible covenants. And today we're looking at the Adamic covenant. So we read about this in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And this particular covenant is also known as the covenant of works or the covenant of creation, but we're going to call it by the title the Adamic covenant, and it applies to all men because all men are descendants of Adam and Eve. So this kind of covenant was a conditional one, unlike others which are unconditional. So the conditions are that they were to obey the commands of God, and they would live have eternal life, and the blessing of God and the presence of God as a reward. So what were the commands that they were to be given? What were the commands given? Fill the earth, to fill up the planet, to have children basically, and to cover over the face of the ground, to live everywhere in the world. I think we're almost there. Secondly, to rule over all creation, the birds of the sea, birds of the air, the fish of the sea, etc., animals on the land. They were to cultivate the Garden of Eden. They were especially placed in a garden, place of blessing, place of fruit trees and all different kinds of food. An idyllic situation for humans. And they were allowed to eat of any plant, except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Only one command, which would make them fail the covenant. Eat any tree, but just not the one. Seems pretty simple, hey? Well, I guess when Satan gets involved, it gets complicated. So, when Eve disobeyed and in response to Satan's temptings, and Adam followed her example, while it brought curses, death, and expulsion from the garden. So the punishment for disobeying the covenant was that the ground was to produce thorns and thistles. That it would be a man to survive by the sweat of his brow. It would be like a real hassle just to survive. Women would have pain in childbirth. Their very most important function in the world is to give birth to children and to be mothers. And then men and women both would be returned to the dust. They would die and their bodies would disintegrate, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. And perhaps the very worst of all the outcomes was that they were to be cast out of God's presence, cast out of Eden. No longer would have access to the tree of life. No longer would have God's presence in the evenings walking with them. So, in Genesis 3:15-24, we really read about all the consequences of disobeying the covenant, especially sin, death, and the curse, separation from God. But there is one bright promise, and that's called the proto-evangelion, the first gospel, the promise of salvation that God would, that the seed of the woman, one of the children that Adam and Eve would have, would crush the head of the serpent, that's Satan. But that seed of the woman would also have his heel bruised by Satan in the process. So that's obviously a promise of Christ, came to crush the head of the serpent. He did that on the cross. But the cross was also that was Satan, if you like, biting at his heel and bringing him death as well. Secondly, we see that God clothed Adam and Eve. He provided clothing for their guilt, for their trespass. because they felt naked once they had disobeyed God. They felt exposed in God's presence. So God provided clothing, a sign of the sacrifice that would bring them cleansing and cover over their nakedness. Well, we'll be looking next time at the Abrahamic covenant. So that's part 1 completed. See you for the next one. Have a good day. Bye.